Have you ever felt like your online life is an open book, like the internet's spying on you and just waiting for it to jump out and say, "Surprise! Spying on you!" Well, guess what? There's a solution for that. Enter Surfshark, your virtual superhero against online intruders. Setting up is easy. You either click, you tap, and voila! Your online life is now your business and nobody else's. Worried about VPNs being expensive? Well, fear not. Surfshark keeps you private without breaking the bank. Also, if you're going somewhere, don't let borders dictate your content choices. Surfshark lets you access your favorite shows from back home, wherever you are. It's like a mask for your online identity, ensuring that you have total privacy. Travel the world, connect to popular websites, unblock streaming platforms, change your virtual location, all of that good stuff. Plus, the Surfshark Alert, antivirus, and search. Monitor your data, keep your devices virus-free, and browse without a trace. With over 3,200 servers worldwide, GPS spoofing on Android, bypass a top-grade encryption, kill switch multi-hop, and a strict no-activity logs policy, Surfshark is your VIP pass to the internet. One subscription, unlimited devices, 24-hour support, they've got your back. And a 30-day money-back guarantee in case you don't like it, which you won't use because you'll love it. So what are you waiting for? Head to surfshark.deals/ITS and enter the promo code ITS to unlock a Surfshark holiday sale. Get up to 6 additional months for free. Thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring, and now back to today's video. Joseph Stalin was one of the most brutal dictators of the 20th century. After taking power, his immediate efforts to turn the Soviet Union into a global superpower backfired, causing his leadership to be called into question. Unwilling to face the possibility of defeat, Stalin decided there was only one option: find and kill everybody who opposed him. So join us today as we examine the Great Purge, Stalin's cold-hearted execution of over 1 million of his own citizens, just to ensure that nobody who survived would dare question his authority ever again. Now, it all began in 1924 with the death of Vladimir Lenin. Lenin had been the head of the Communist Party and was the founder of the Soviet Union as a single-party socialist state. But his somewhat sudden death left a power vacuum. Lenin had suffered multiple strokes in the years leading up to his death, resulting in partial paralysis, but he had appeared to be recovering. When he fell into a coma on January 21st, 1924, and died later that same day, the stage was set for somebody else to claim power. Several high-ranking officials jockeyed for that power, with the two frontrunners being Joseph Stalin and Leon Trotsky. Stalin was the general secretary of the Communist Party, and Trotsky was the commissar for military and naval affairs, essentially making them the top political official and top military official respectively. It took 4 years, but Stalin emerged victorious as the leader of the Soviet Union. He exiled Trotsky to Turkey and began undertaking the first of his 3 5-year plans. Now, the first 5-year plan had 2 major objectives: rapid industrialization and the collectivization of agriculture. Privately owned livestock and farmlands became government property overnight, and the peasants were forced to become collective farmers instead. This abrupt change led to a decrease in agricultural production. Many people forced to work on the collective farms had little to no experience, with a large number of experienced farmers either fleeing to urban areas, fleeing the Soviet Union entirely, or trying to oppose the authoritarian takeover. This opposition was often met with lethal force from the government. In addition to overall lower output, the government seized the vast majority of the grain being produced, choosing to export it rather than feed its own people. The Soviet Union needed money in order to fund its entirely unrealistic pace of industrialization, and Stalin believed that this was the most efficient way to get that money. Unfortunately, this resulted in years of famine across the Soviet Union, with the worst year being 1932-33. It's estimated that the famine resulted in the deaths of 5.7 to 8.7 million people, with as many as 7.5 million of those deaths occurring in a single year. While Stalin had been widely accepted as the new leader of the Soviet Union, his disastrous 5-year plan made people call his leadership into question. By 1934, Stalin's rivals were already trying to make moves against his authority. Even from exile, Trotsky was calling for the removal of Stalin from office, and he wasn't alone. That summer, Adolf Hitler carried out Operation Hummingbird, also known as the Night of the Long Knives. It was 3 days of extrajudicial executions of Hitler's political opponents, and it is claimed that Stalin was inspired by this. But it wasn't all in yet. In an attempt to win back public support, Stalin would take contradictory actions. He began releasing prisoners who had been convicted of minor offenses and launched a commission to investigate false imprisonments, but at the same time, he was ordering executions of suspected spies without trial. This wouldn't last long, however. While Stalin did his best to feign a desire to limit government oppression, that ended in December of 1934 with the assassination of Sergei Kirov, a high-ranking Soviet official and strong advocate of Stalin. Following Kirov's assassination, Stalin began becoming extremely concerned with the threat of assassination. He's often described as having become paranoid at this point, but one thing was clear: there was no more room for mixed messages. Public actions to show a reduction in state repression would come to an end, and instead Stalin made it clear that his enemies would be found and dealt with. Throughout 1935, this mostly just meant expelling suspected enemies from urban areas. People would be expelled from major cities like Leningrad by the thousands, forced onto the collective farms where they couldn't cause as much trouble. This was already a purge in a manner of speaking, and it had been going on for years. The Soviet Union's Communist Party had been purging its ranks of members, with over 400,000 people being expelled from the party for fear that they were Trotskyites. But in 1936, the purge was going to take on a new face. Executions against ordinary civilians accused of being spies or attempting to undermine the Soviet Union were hardly rare, but for the first time, Stalin was going to turn the party against its own upper ranks, and this purge of party leadership was going to be as public as it was bloody. Now, the first of the Moscow trials is generally considered the official beginning of the Great Purge. It was a trial of 16 supposed Trotskyite counter-revolutionaries, with the chief defendants in the trial being Grigory Zinoviev and Lev Kamenev. The two were prominent figures in the Communist Party and had been among Lenin's closest associates. While it was true that both men opposed Stalin politically, especially in light of the death toll resulting from the famine, they were trying to enact change through political means. However, at their trial, what they confessed to was far different than the reality of their actions. Zinoviev and Kamenev confessed to being involved in the assassination of Kirov, as well as confessing that they planned to assassinate Stalin. Many historians believe that Stalin had actually ordered the assassination of Kirov himself, and there was no real evidence to link either of these men to the crime, nor to any plots against Stalin's life. But since they confessed, it didn't matter. Of course, those confessions at trial were the result of intense physical and psychological torture, but the public didn't know any of that. All 16 defendants confessed to the charges, and they were all executed. This show trial had been organized by Genrikh Yagoda, chief of the People's Commissar for Internal Affairs, or the NKVD. The NKVD was the Soviet Union's secret police at the time, the predecessor to the KGB. But a month after the trial, Yagoda was replaced as chief of the NKVD by Nikolai Yezhov. Yezhov was zealously loyal to Stalin, and his first order of business was to arrest Yagoda on Stalin's orders. Stalin was becoming suspicious of Yagoda and wanted him out of the way. To that end, Yezhov had the NKVD contaminate his office with mercury. The contamination was then used as an excuse that Yagoda was attempting to assassinate Yezhov. He would remain in custody until his trial in 1938, proclaiming his innocence and loyalty to Stalin the entire time. In 1937, Stalin directed the NKVD and regional party members to estimate the number of criminals and kulaks in each district. Kulaks was a term that before the Soviet Union specifically referred to peasants that owned 8 acres of land or more. Once the Soviet Union was formed and land was collectivized, kulak became more of a vague term that referred to wealthy peasants and property ownership in general. Though their property had been seized by the government, the formerly wealthy peasants were seen as a threat to the communist society, and as such, they needed to be purged. Yezhov issued NKVD Order 00447, which was designed to deal with the kulaks and other anti-Soviet elements, such as Trotskyites, members of any political party beside the Communist Party, suspected political enemies of Stalin, intellectuals, and really, well, anybody that they just felt like they wanted to purge. These people would be rounded up by the NKVD and either summarily executed or sent to gulags. The initial estimates from each district were based on the number of people already under surveillance, but once that number had already been purged from the district, requests would be sent to Stalin to increase the number by thousands at a time. These requests were authorized, and the purge continued. It was in 1937 that the second show trial took place as well. The 17 accused were politicians, like in the first trial, though they were less prominent figures than those from the first one. Western observers were allowed to attend this trial, and they all believed that the men had been tried fairly. After all 16 of the men in attendance confessed to their guilt. Of the 17 originally accused, former head of the NKVD, Alexander Beloborodov, was the only one not to confess. As a result, he was not present at the trial. But what the Western spectators didn't realize was that these confessions had all been obtained through sadistic torture methods. The trials had been rehearsed repeatedly beforehand, and the interrogators and torturers were all seated in the front row to remind the accused what would happen if they deviated from the carefully rehearsed script. 13 of the 17 men were executed following the trial, with the others, including Beloborodov, sent to the gulags. All 4 of them were murdered while there. The second show trial paved the way for Yezhov to expand the purge, in particular thanks to the testimony relating to Nikolai Bukharin and the right opposition. The right opposition, a faction of the Communist Party that objected to parts of Stalin's 5-year plan, were believed to have largely dissolved by 1933, but it appeared that they still remained in at least some capacity, or at least their alleged existence provided justification to continue the purge. However, the purge began to extend beyond just supposed political opposition. Ethnic minorities also became a target, with the largest operation targeting the Polish population. Over 110,000 people were executed as part of the Polish operation, with only about 85,000 of them actually known to be ethnic Poles. The others were merely suspected of being Polish, which was enough for them to be summarily executed with no follow-up questions. Despite ethnic minorities only making up 1.6% of the population of the Soviet Union, they accounted for 36% of the total deaths during the Great Purge, with Poles alone making up 12% of the total deaths. In addition, there were also people who were purged merely by circumstance rather than any action on their part. If a person was executed for opposing Stalin, then their entire family could fall victim to the purge as well. So too could their friends, neighbors, and passing acquaintances. With Stalin trying to industrialize the Soviet Union at a rate that simply wasn't feasible, there were also a fair number of industrial accidents. Anybody who worked at or near the site of one of these accidents could be executed on the basis of alleged sabotage, even if there was absolutely no evidence of foul play. The loss of civilian lives was immense, but one of the most shocking developments was the military purge. This would also be one of the most important aspects of the Great Purge as it related to future events. While over 30,000 members of the Soviet military were executed as part of the purge, it was not exclusive to the rank and file. A staggering percentage of high-ranking officers were subjected to the purge, including 3 of 5 marshals, equivalent to 4-star generals, 13 of 15 army commanders, equivalent to 3-star generals, 8 of 9 admirals, 50 of 57 corps commanders, 154 out of 186 divisional commanders, 202 out of 406 brigade commanders, and 11 vice commanders of defense, 98 of 108 members of the Supreme Military Soviets, all 16 army commissars, 25 of 28 corps commissars, and 58 of 64 divisional commissars. Not all of the purged officers were executed, and about 30% of those that were convicted were eventually allowed to re-enter military service. However, the mass imprisonment and execution of high-ranking military officials played a key role in Hitler's decision-making during World War II. Hitler's generals felt that an invasion of the Soviet Union would be a fool's errand. But Hitler disagreed. He believed that their military would be severely weakened by the loss of so much knowledge and experience at the highest ranks. This decision to invade led to his defeat at the Battle of Stalingrad, which is widely considered to be the turning point of the war. So, in March of 1938, the third and final of Stalin's show trials would take place in Moscow. Also known as the Trial of the 21, on account of the 21 defendants, this was the highest profile of the 3 trials because it involved the highest profile defendants. Among them, Bukharin and Yagoda, as well as multiple diplomats and people's commissars, which would be roughly the equivalent of cabinet members in the United States. Once again, brutal torture was used to ensure that all of the accused would confess to their crimes, or perhaps all but one. There is some evidence that Bukharin voluntarily confessed in exchange for certain liberties. He was given the opportunity to write 4 manuscripts while awaiting trial, though these would not see publication until the 1990s, when they were found in Stalin's personal archives. It's probable that Stalin never intended to honor any deal that was proffered to Bukharin, though even if he had, that all would have gone out the window when Bukharin took the stand. While he did confess to his crimes, he did so in the most sarcastic manner possible. This was only known to those in attendance, as Stalin personally altered the transcript of the trial before it went to publication. It wasn't until 1996 that the original transcript, complete with Stalin's pencil-marked modifications, was released. Bukharin stated in court, "I accept responsibility even for those crimes about which I did not know or about which I do not have the slightest idea." But, sarcastic or not, a confession is still a confession. And since the trials had just been for show, the verdicts were already predetermined. All 21 defendants were found guilty, with 18 being sentenced to death. The remaining 3 were sentenced to 15, 20, and 25 years in prison. After 3 years, the Great Purge finally started coming to a close following the third Moscow trial. Yezhov was fired as head of the NKVD, and on November 17, 1938, the government issued a decree suspending executions and putting an end to the NKVD's numerous orders of repression. But the damage had already been done. The exact number is impossible to know, but it's estimated that the Great Purge claimed the lives of between 700,000 and 1.2 million citizens. Some were political enemies of Stalin, but others were executed because of their ethnicity, because they happened to be in vague proximity of an industrial accident, or because they were chosen entirely at random. Becoming the target of the Purge spelled doom for a person's entire family as well. If a man was convicted, even when the NKVD knew that it was on the basis of false charges, their family was subject to punishment as well. Wives and children as young as 12 could be executed or sent to the gulags, with younger children being sent to orphanages. However, once the Great Purge came to a close, it was time to tie up loose ends. Stalin had tried to execute all of his political enemies, but he had done so through corrupt, extrajudicial means. This meant that everybody involved had to be dealt with as well. After being stripped of his position, Yezhov was put on trial and executed. The judges from the show trials were also executed, as were the 3 men who were only sentenced to prison rather than death in the final Moscow trial. There was only one man that seemed immune to Stalin's persecution, and that man was Vasily Blokhin, the head executioner for the NKVD. Blokhin was responsible for carrying out tens of thousands of executions by his own hand, including the execution of many of the people that we've talked about today. Politicians, the military, and even the secret police were all expendable. But the man who would murder anyone at Stalin's command, well, he was untouchable.